Luca looked at the groceries on the table, but he had lost all interest in cooking. He sat on the sofa and tried to work out where it had all gone wrong. Marcia hadn't done anything wrong. She had been a good wife and had put up with him for a long time. But he had just been a huge disappointment to her. It was understandable that she would want more for their child. He realized that he was being too impatient. He had thought that if he knew what was happening in the future, he could make sure he took advantage of any opportunities and changed the status quo. But he couldn't have it both ways. He looked down at the contract that he hadn't had the chance to show her and smiled to himself. Everything will be better in the morning, he thought. What he needed to do was to calm himself and steel his resolve. To make her believe in him wasn't something that could be done overnight. He needed to work much harder. Meanwhile, the extremely disappointed Marcia had taken her daughter to her brother Morgan's house. It was a modern building, and it was only a year since it had been renovated. "Do you think Mom and Dad will mind us staying here?" After all, they bought the house for you as a wedding gift.
It's my house, so I'll let in whoever I want. Besides, you're my sister and also their daughter. They can't expect me to throw you out onto the street.
Their parents had always favored her brother, even more so after she ran off to marry Luca without their consent. A few years later, when Morgan had gotten married, their parents had gifted him $100,000 for a new house without batting an eyelid. But when it came to Marcia, even asking for $10,000 seemed like an impossible request.
You and Iris can stay here as long as you like.
He handed her a debit card.
Leave everything to me. There's some money on this card. The PIN is my date of birth. After paying the fine, there should still be some money left. But if you need any more, just tell me.
She immediately wished she could refuse. She didn't like having to ask for help. But she knew that if she didn't accept, then she would have no way of paying the fine. "I hate having to do this. I don't know when I'll be able to pay you back."
Well, that lying, good-for-nothing lowlife that you married doesn't have any money. Who else are you going to ask for help? Besides, we're family, and I want to help you.
Just then, Iris spoke.
My daddy is a kind man. He wouldn't lie to me.
She hated the way her uncle talked about her father.
Forget about your daddy. He's a liar. You can live with me for now, and I'll look after you.
You're the liar!
She shouted angrily.
I don't want to talk to you anymore.
She wouldn't allow anyone to say anything bad about her father, not even her uncle. Seeing her daughter's huffy expression, Marcia tried to ignore it. "She's still young. Don't take it seriously. It's all Luca's fault. He just said what she wanted to hear. He said Iris could go to a kindergarten, and it turned out he only enrolled her in trial classes." He pursed his lips as she told him why she had decided to move out.
You're better off without him. Oh, but by the way, after you've paid the fine tomorrow, we can go and sort out the divorce. I know a good lawyer.
She remained quiet. Even though she really wanted to divorce him, the idea of actually going through with it churned inside her. She wasn't ready to make it official just then. Over the years, she had heard too many unpleasant examples of life after divorce. She knew that single parents didn't always have an easy time of it, and she had sworn to herself that she would never end up in that situation. Morgan looked at the sad faces of his sister and niece.
Come on, you haven't eaten yet. Let's go out to dinner. My treat.
The next morning, it was announced that the value of Forest Group's properties had doubled overnight. When people first heard the news, they assumed it was fake. They couldn't help but think that it was a clever tactic by the sales team to boost property sales. Many believed that, after a few days, the prices would revert to their previously low prices. When Morgan heard the news, he didn't suspect a thing. He had heard rumors about the planned development, but there had been no official confirmation on the matter. However, since the announcement, many property managers had begun advertising their properties, which meant that there was a good chance that it was true. He sighed and looked over at his sister.
The value of these properties has skyrocketed. If I'd known this was going to happen, I would have bought a house there.
Well, the chance of having such luck is really small. But on the inside, she was thinking the opposite. If only I had some money to invest. Then I could have bought a house there and made a sizable profit by selling it. Not only could I have paid off my debts, but the coming days would be worry-free for the two of us. But unfortunately, she didn't have such luck. While Marcia and Morgan were discussing the rise in property value, Luka arrived at the Forest Group's sales department. The atmosphere in the building had undergone a complete transformation. The day before, business had been cold and desolate, but at that moment, the sales department was bursting with people. He scanned the room until he locked eyes with a customer.
Do you need a parking spot here?
Do you have one?
Luka immediately took out the contract. The man took a look at it, and his eyes lit up.
How much are you selling for?
$160,000, but I need the money in full today. Also, I only paid the 10% down payment. You'll have to take care of the rest.
That comes to around $250,000. That's quite expensive.
It's a good price. It's in a good location. It's very close to the elevator. If I didn't want a quick sale, I could easily sell this for $300,000. You're getting a good deal, and you know it. But if you're not interested, I'm sure I can find someone else who is.
Just at that moment, another customer caught sight of the contract.
Are you selling? I'll buy it if he doesn't want it.
At once, the hesitating customer became anxious.
Can't you see that we're trying to do a deal here? First come, first served. I'll pay the $160,000.
I'll pay $170,000.
The parking spots were obviously in short supply. The other parking spots had all sold, so there was a high demand for those wanting to buy one. It was the same with those with property to sell. Luka noticed that the first customer was beginning to panic, and so he turned toward the higher bidder with a smile on his face.
Sir, I'm sorry, but I must be fair. This man was here first, so I must give him first refusal. Of course, if he doesn't want it, then I can sell it to you.
I want it. Of course, I want it.
The second customer cursed under his breath and wandered off to find another seller.
I like how you do things. How about this? I'll give you another $5,000.
There's no need. We agreed on a price.
The two men went to the counter to finalize the sale. Both men were happy with the deal, and the buyer had a positive impression of Luka. As he left, he grasped Luka's hand and thanked him profusely. Luka's lips curved into a smile as he looked at his retreating silhouette. Of course, anyone who had gone to the Forest Group that day with the intention of making a purchase was clearly well off. It wasn't an easy task to choose one buyer when there were so many. For Luka, it wasn't a case of picking one at random. The man was Vincent Gaines, the deputy general manager of Marcia's workplace. Although he was only the deputy general manager of the company, he was a well-respected member of the community. His father was a well-known real estate tycoon in the area who owned a gargantuan amount of property. What was interesting about him was that Vincent didn't want to rely on his father's background to get ahead. Everything he achieved was because of his own hard work. The reason Luka had chosen him was because he wanted to help Martha. Of course, he wouldn't tell anyone that. Besides, the only time he had met him had been in his previous life, so as far as Martha was concerned, the two men had never met. After getting his money, Luka went home, had lunch, and tidied himself up. 30 minutes later, Luka arrived at Marcia's workplace, Barco Advertising. Looking at the huge billboard above him, he couldn't help but sigh. He was reminded of the hardships he had suffered in his previous life. He was about to do the most important thing since his rebirth. Whether he could win back his wife and make up for his regret would be decided that day. Meanwhile, Morgan and Marcia were upstairs in the manager's office. The person Marcia had offended was Vincent's client, and they wanted to find Vincent and express their willingness to pay the fine to avoid legal consequences. With Vincent's background and wealth, he wasn't too concerned about money. However, he had lost a client and become a laughingstock because of her actions, and that made him very unhappy. After thinking it over, he had decided that he had no choice but to ask her to pay compensation for his loss of business. He could see that Marcia was dedicated to her work. She was always punctual and usually didn't make any mistakes. He had also heard about her worthless husband and had felt sympathy for her. For those reasons, he had decided not to dismiss her. Seeing Morgan walking over with Marcia, Vincent sized him up and asked,
Is this your husband?
"He's my younger brother. I've come to apologize. I'm so sorry that I caused you to lose business." Vincent merely raised his eyebrows.
Thank you. I appreciate that it's not easy to admit that you were in the wrong. Once the payment is made, this matter is over, and we won't talk about it again. All I ask is that you don't do anything like that in the future. Do you understand?
His tone was gentle. He was a very forgiving man. Marcia was very surprised because the previous day, Vincent had been furious. What she didn't know was that Vincent was in a good mood today because he had just made a deal with Luca for the parking spot. He had also discovered that other buyers had paid more money than him for a less favorable location. What's more, prior to the sale, he had put a down payment on a house in the area. His son was already 2 years old, and he was thinking ahead to when his son would start school. He knew that not having a parking spot would be a huge problem, and thanks to Luca, he no longer had that worry. For those reasons, Vincent was in a very good mood. He took Morgan and Marcia over to the finance department and asked the staff there to deal with the transaction. Just as Morgan and Marcia were about to hand over the card, they heard a voice call out to them.
Wait, Morgan, you don't have to pay the fine.
They all looked to see where the voice was coming from. It was Luca. At once, Morgan's face stiffened.
Are you out of your mind? Who else would pay if I didn't? You?
Luca ignored Morgan and gave Marcia a serious look.
I said before that I'll come up with a solution.
Marcia looked sadly back at her husband. "I told you, Luca. I'm fed up with your promises." Morgan shoved the card toward the cashier.
Ignore him.
Marcia glanced at Luca with an expression of utmost disappointment. "Please leave. This is my workplace, not my home. Don't cause a scene." Seeing that his wife no longer trusted him, Luca simply opened his briefcase and let all the banknotes spill out onto the counter. $150,000 wasn't that much in the grand scheme of things, but it was still a sizable pile in cold, hard cash. And an enormous pile of cash spilling out of the briefcase of a supposedly worthless trash husband had a most glorious impact. The staff in the finance department were speechless. They wondered why the two men were fighting to help Marcia pay the fine. Morgan and Marcia could only stare at the pile of money in shock. They didn't know what to say. Never in their wildest dreams did they think Luca would be able to make such a large sum of money. They had believed it was just another one of his exaggerated brags. "Where did you get so much money?" asked Marcia. She was well aware of what kind of husband she had. Morgan frowned in confusion.
Did you rob a bank?
Luca looked him straight in the eye.
I earned it from doing business.
A scornful chortle escaped Morgan's lips.
Business? Trash like you can do business?
He didn't mean to embarrass his sister in public, but the man really wound him up. He could accept anyone boasting in front of him, but not Luca. Never in a million years.
You don't know me as well as you think. How can you be sure that I can't?
Luca asked calmly. Marcia's icy cold voice rang out. "Have you sold the house?" She had been thinking about selling the house after the divorce, and her face turned pale. She thought, but if he really has sold the house, where is he going to live? She never thought that she would be the one worrying about him.
No, I didn't sell the house. I'm telling the truth.
What a joke. Do you think anyone would believe you?
Morgan interrupted bluntly.
That's dirty money you have there, so my sister won't use it. I'm warning you one last time. Hurry up and get out of here. Don't get in the way.
What's going on?
Leading the investigation, would be more than happy to put the goon behind bars.
Kill Damon Hemsworth.
Jasper's cry for vengeance echoed through the night, his resentment boiling over as he set his sight on his ultimate enemy. There was nothing else.
What's all this shouting for?
Never in a million years.
You don't know me as well as you think. How can you be sure that I can't?
Luca asked calmly. Marcia's icy cold voice rang out. "Have you sold the house?" She had been thinking about selling the house after the divorce, and her face turned pale. She thought, but if he really has sold the house, where is he going to live? She never thought that she would be the one worrying about him.
No, I didn't sell the house. I'm telling the truth.
What a joke. Do you think anyone would believe you?
Morgan interrupted bluntly.
That's dirty money you have there, so my sister won't use it. I'm warning you one last time. Hurry up and get out of here. Don't get in the way.
What's going on? What's all this shouting for?
Hearing her boss's booming voice, Marcia felt her legs wobble as she stammered for an explanation. She had already caused great losses to the company and was still negotiating her place at the company. She couldn't afford more disruptions. Mr. Gaines, I'm so sorry. This is my husband. I'll get rid of him right away. With that, Morgan grabbed Luka's arm and stared straight at him.
If you cause my sister to lose her job, then don't blame me for crushing you like a gnat.
Luka simply shook off Morgan's hand, brushed himself down, and turned to look at Vincent. At the sight of Luka's serious face, Vincent was stunned for a moment, but a moment later, a smile beamed on his face. Seeing that Luka had no intention of moving, Morgan was ready to kick him in the shins. But then, Vincent's surprised voice rang out.
Mr. Miller, what a coincidence.
All Morgan could do was to stand by and watch Vincent and Luka shake hands and greet each other like old friends.
What a coincidence.
Luka said with a smile.
I'm here to clear my wife's debts. Mr. Gaines, do you work here?
At the sight of his clueless expression, Vincent glanced toward the dumbstruck Marcia and raised a wary eyebrow. She had mentioned her husband's misdeed so many times that everyone in the company knew about it. They all sympathized with her. They were told her husband was a loser and cared about nothing except gambling and drinking. Vincent detested that sort of person. Such a husband couldn't even be considered a man. But now it seemed that the worthless husband was the same man whom he had done business with that very morning. For a few moments, he didn't know how he was supposed to react. According to what Marcia had said, Luka Miller was the kind of trash who would pounce at the sight of a free penny. Instead, he had acted like a true gentleman when he had sold him the parking spot and refused the extra money he had been offered. It just didn't make sense. In fact, not only was he a trustworthy businessman, but Luka was the sort of man he could see himself being friends with. Of course, Luka himself was no fool. In his past life, he had both seen and met all sorts of people. He knew exactly what was going on.
Mr. Gaines, I'm sure my reputation precedes me. I was indeed a terrible man before and brought my wife much pain and suffering. I would also like to take this opportunity to make an oath, with all present as my witnesses. Should I ever bring pain to my wife again, I shall perish in lightning and fire.
Of course, he didn't want Marcia to look like a liar. He openly admitted his misdeeds and also announced his determination to change for the better, making sure that Marcia was able to keep her dignity at her workplace. Marcia was speechless and just stared at her husband, unsure of whether or not to believe him.
That's good to hear.
Vincent said with a dry smile. He had no interest in getting involved in other people's affairs. Just then, his assistant called out to him.
Mr. Gaines, Mr. Mayor of Herbal Wines will be here soon.
Hearing the reminder, he took the chance to leave.
I'm sorry, but I must go. I have work to do. Mr. Miller, it's good to see you again.
Vincent was pleased to be able to excuse himself. If he hadn't been aware of the relationship between Luka and Marcia, he would have liked to chat with him a little longer. But having found out about Luka's background, his interest was greatly reduced. Hearing the words herbal wines, a memory flashed through Luka's mind. In his previous life, not long after Marcia committed suicide, Barco Advertising had closed down. It had been something to do with their business dealings with herbal wines. Luka knew that 2 weeks later. The wine company was going to be exposed for using industrial quantities of alcohol at near toxic amounts to reduce base cost, resulting in widespread food poisoning cases across multiple regions of the country. The crisis was going to force herbal wines to shutter. As a result of their affiliation, Barco Advertising was going to be accused of negligence. Barco will have to pay millions in compensation, and it, too, will eventually go out of business. After the closure, Vincent Gaines was going to disappear from public life. He would briefly work for his father's company, but then seemed to vanish off the radar altogether.
Vincent, are you doing business with Herbal Wines?
I am, but I don't see what business it is of yours.
If it hadn't been for the events that morning, he wouldn't even have bothered to reply. But Luca wasn't angry.
It's just that I heard that there are some problems with the company. Make sure you check them out before you do business with them.
There was a trace of displeasure in Vincent's face as he took in what Luca had just said. Herbal Wines was a large-scale company in the industry. This was the largest order the company had ever received since its founding. If the deal went ahead, he would be able to prove himself once and for all and earn some respect from his father, Vincent thought.
I really need this deal. How dare this man suggest that I be wary of dealing with such a well-respected company?
His initial good impression of Luca was gradually fading. Marcia noticed the displeasure on her boss's face and hurriedly said, "I'm very sorry. He's just spouting nonsense. He doesn't know what he's talking about." Vincent looked at Luca and said,
Be careful what you say unless you want to be accused of libel.
I know what I'm talking about. If you don't believe me, you can buy some of their products and get them tested. If I'm wrong, I'll pay you another $150,000. But if I'm right, then we'll say no more about it.
Marcia was furious when she heard Luca boasting again. "Morgan, get him out of here before he tells any more lies." Marcia was worried that Luca would end up in an awkward situation like her if he kept spouting nonsense. She knew if that order was also messed up, Vincent wouldn't hesitate to fire her. Just as Morgan was about to drag Luca away, Vincent spoke.
Wait, I owe you a favor for what happened this morning. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. If you lose, I don't want your money, but you have to apologize in front of the company. If what you say turns out to be true, then I'll pay you instead.
Marcia could only shudder in panicked frustration. Having said his piece, Vincent swiveled around and walked to a cashier in the finance department.
Go and buy all the wines produced by Herbal Wines right now.
He said to the cashier on his way out. The others looked blankly at each other. They were shocked that he was taking what Lukas said seriously. Marcia was shaking with anger. "Do you want to get me fired? And why are you interfering in company affairs? Are you crazy?"
You'll know soon that I'm not crazy. Believe me, there are a lot of problems with that company. Mr. Gaines will only thank me.
"Thank you. You're just as arrogant and boastful as you've always been. Get the hell out of here. Don't make a fool of yourself." Luca didn't resist as Morgan dragged him away, leaving Marcia to pay her fine. The staff member looked at Marcia. "Card or cash?" she asked. Marcia took a deep breath and said, "Cash." Although she still had no idea how Luca had gotten hold of the cash, she didn't want to use her brother's money unless she really had to. It wasn't because she was considerate of her brother, but because she felt Luca owed her. If need be, when it came to the divorce, she could let Luca have the house and consider it as repayment for the debt. As they left the building, Morgan cursed and raged at Luca as he dragged him out into the street. When Morgan had finished venting his anger, Luca looked at him and said,
Where are Marcia and Iris staying?
It's none of your business. You don't need to worry about them. I'm taking care of them now.
Then Marcia also came out and walked straight up to Luca. "Tell me the truth. Did you sell the house? Is that how you got the money?"
As I said, I earned money from doing business. I took $100 from you. 2 days ago, I made some money by selling balloons. Then, I bought some lobsters and sold them to the Pacific Ocean Hotel for a profit. I earned about $10,000 for that. Recently, I heard that the parking spots at the Forest Group were going cheap, so I paid the down payment for one. I had no idea that the price would more than double the next day, but when I heard the news, I decided to sell. That's how I got the money.
So, it was the Forest Group, was it? You made all that money out of just $100? So, If I give you 10,000, can you earn 10 million in 4 days?
If you don't believe me, you can ask Vincent. He bought the parking spot from me.
Marcia hesitated. Under normal circumstances, she wouldn't have believed him. After all, it wasn't the normal way to make money. But Vincent had said that he knew Luca and owed him a favor, which meant there must be some truth in his words. Morgan was shocked.
Marcia, do you really believe him, even if Vincent bought this parking spot? So what? Can he prove that it was originally his? And if it's true, why didn't he show you the contract?
I don't have the contract anymore. It was a transfer, so I had to hand it over when I received the money. But you can check with them if you don't believe me.
Morgan curled his lip.
You can pull the wool over Marcia, but you can't fool me. And Vincent clearly thinks you're annoying.
He turned to his sister.
Marcia, let's go. He's talking nonsense. Let's see if we can find a new kindergarten for Iris.
I'll pay for Iris's tuition, Marcia. You can send her to the kindergarten tomorrow. I'll sort out the money.
Morgan pulled Marcia away in disdain. Then he turned back to Luca and said,
You're flashing your money around today. You really think you're rich, don't you? Have you actually got any money left?
Enough for my daughter's kindergarten.
Luca sighed. He hadn't managed to win Marcia around, but he could see that she was starting to soften. Even if she still had doubts, he was clearly making progress. He waited until the two of them had vanished out of sight before leaving the company premises. As for Vincent, he had only intervened because Marcia was still working there. Otherwise, he would have had no interest in how the company operated. He did some calculations in his head. He had sold the parking spot for $160,000. After paying the fine, he would have $10,000 left. It was still enough for Iris's school fees. He had chosen the more expensive option, and after factoring in extras such as school uniforms and school meals, he would still have a small amount left. But even if he spent all of the money, he wasn't too worried. In the future, he knew that he would be able to earn a fortune. What's more, he could foresee the future. That was the most important part of his plan. Others had to take risks, but for Luca, the future was full of opportunities that were hidden from most people. Of course, more importantly, he didn't forget the promise he made. He must earn $1 million within 100 days. 4 days had passed, and he didn't want to waste any of the time that remained. He had a rough idea of what he was going to do. His main aim was to make money, but there was one other thing to do, and it was as important as saving his relationship with his wife and his daughter. Luca thought for a while. He had two options. The first venture involved a machine factory. Because the plant was going through a renovation, the equipment was being sold for scrap. However, Luca was aware that many of these machines were, in fact, relatively new. These machines could be sold to second-hand equipment sellers. After a few touch-ups, the second-hand sellers can sell them as new to unsuspecting buyers. Although the process was a little complicated, machines that were originally worth a few $100s could end up being sold for up to $300,000. His second option was to set up a small business on the street. He clearly remembered how fruit salads had become popular that summer. If he got into the business early, he could sell as much as 600 to 700 pounds of fruit per day. With each pound of fruit priced at just $12, he could make a solid 50% profit. If the business went well, he could earn up to $60,000 or $70,000 per month. He weighed up the pros and cons. Both options were viable. He would make a good profit on the machine factory, but it would be much harder to set up. He would also need to find someone to sell the equipment to. Relatively speaking, despite its mediocre earnings and slow pace for growth, the second option would be easier to set up. Of course, that option had its constraints. He would need funds to set it up, and he would have to retreat before the competition became too fierce. Having made his decision, Luca went straight to the nearby orchard. The orchard